first I would like to pose the question to Her Excellency. Please, as being a former diplomat and now very active in the civil society, can you share your findings on the state of democracy and human rights in Western Balkans and beyond? And what are the perspectives of these topics?
And I have to say a few words to our host and organizer, Civil, that I met Jabe Derala shortly after my arrival in Skopje 2011, and I learned to appreciate the work of Civil during my 3 years in the country as one of the best organizations in the field of enhancing civil society, protecting human rights, and promoting a free society. I particularly appreciate the very clear position Civil took from the beginning regarding the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine, maybe the greatest danger right now for our part of the world. Green Civil is addressing the most imminent danger with a worldwide effect, climate change. Both challenges, as well as many others, are used by the intensive hybrid warfare from Russian and its allies. Authoritarianism is indeed an overarching danger for the so-called free world, now ever more than before. The definition of authoritarianism, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is the enforcement or advocacy of strict obedience to authority at the expense of personal freedom and lack of concern for the wishes or opinions of others. If this is the definition, I wonder why people around the world and recently in many European countries vote for persons and parties which are clearly in favor of authoritarianism. This is a warning sign which we should take very seriously. In these extremely difficult times with its multiple crises, many people are afraid and intimidated. They understand that huge changes are taking place, but do not know how to react to them. It is, of course, the choice of each individual group of people to respond to these challenges, but politicians, business elites, and intellectuals should play a leading role in these responses according to their responsibility. But often the opposite is happening. The political, economic, and so-called intellectualist elites are rather misusing their influence to even more intimidate the citizens. They are looking for personal or group interests, and they are looking also for authoritarian solutions. Hypocrisy is a widespread phenomenon in international politics. This has a huge impact on ordinary voters because they see the failure of the ruling elites and ask for alternatives. This must be discussed and tackled wherever possible. I do not know the solution, of course, but I know that freedom is crucial. Solutions can only be found by free persons in a free society with free media and a free discourse. And that is something which is always underlining also the former German president from East Germany. This would be in accordance with the thoughts of one of the greatest Germans, the philosopher Immanuel Kant, whose 300th birthday we celebrated this year. This is not the place to discuss Kant's philosophy. It's too complex, too huge. Many books were published about him this year, and you will find a book even in English and maybe in your language, whether it's Macedonian, Serbian, Albanian, and read more about it. He's not easy to read, not only because of his complex thinking and his complex language, but in view of the complex problems that mankind must resolve now, I think it's justified to refer to Kant. I'm referring here to one of his most known theses. Er zitiert first in German. Die Menschenwürde ist ein Status, der das Leben von Menschen über jeden Preis stellt. Alle Menschen haben ungeachtet ihres Rangs oder ihrer sozialen Klasse den gleichen inneren Wert oder die gleiche Würde. Human dignity is a status which puts the life of men above any price. All human beings, irrespective of their position or social class, possess the same inner value and the same dignity. This became the charter of the German fundamental law after the Second World War, the first charter of our constitution. Die Würde des Menschen ist unantastbar, sie zu schützen ist Verpflichtung aller staatlichen Gewalt. Human dignity is inviolable, protecting it is an obligation of all state power. I'm proud that the founding fathers and few mothers of the German fundamental law after the Second World War and the darkest period in German history with the Nazi barbarism, they took this Kant principle as the first chapter of the German constitution. And it also became the first chapter of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. Human dignity, I'm citing, human dignity is inviolable, it must be respected and protected. Looking at the definition of authoritarianism, which I cited above from the Oxford Dictionary, it is very clear that an authoritarian state can never be a solution. I think we must take the worries, fears, and anger of people these days very seriously. The problems we are facing are extremely complex, and therefore there can be no simple solution. But it is the task of politicians, intellectuals, business elites to explain to the ordinary people that solutions will be difficult and painful. For me, there is no question that those who are richer and stronger must shoulder the heavier part of the burden. The supporters of authoritarianism promise easy solutions, but in fact, these solutions will only lead to more problems and more injustice. The promise of easy solutions for complex problems is a lie, and we have to say this every day and everywhere. We have to say and to prove every day that the human dignity is inviolable. And in view of the reality, what is happening in Ukraine, what is happening in the Middle East, but what is happening in Sudan? Nobody talks about it. The terrible war, hunger, and in many other places of the world. I could mention Myanmar, I do not want to continue. But we have nevertheless to say and to underline every day that human dignity is inviolable. That is why easy solutions with migration. Now we send all the Syrian refugees home, what say some politicians in Germany, but also in other countries, and what is certainly one of the aims of Turkey by interfering into the situation in Syria, is that they want to get rid of these 3 million Syrian refugees. So we have always some interest. But the most important principle is the human dignity. And that is also what the Israeli philosopher Omri Böhm said in Vienna in May this year at the opening of the Vienna Spring Festival. He said, "Die Würde des Menschen ist unantastbar." The dignity of the human being is inviolable. He is representing, Omri Böhm, a radical universalism. And that was not welcome by the Jewish community in Vienna. They boycotted his speech, unfortunately. I think they did not understand what actually was the aim of what he said. No? And I think there must be also a limit to tolerance. We have to, of course, democracy is based on debate, on discussion, on discourse. But with some people, it's not possible. You cannot have a discourse with Putin, in my view. I spent 6 years in Russia, and I think I know the Russian system a little bit in depth. And you will not be able. He understands only the language of force. And let not have, again, a very weak compromise, which will lead only to further problems. It may stop the war for some time, but it will not be a solution. So no easy solutions to complex problems. And I hope that we can discuss this a little bit more, and I'm glad that I'm sitting here besides a woman from Ukraine, because they have been feeling this Russian dictatorship on their shoulders for more than almost 3 years now, and young people here in the region don't understand it. I spoke to a young, not so young anymore, but relatively young Serbian woman, and I said, "Isn't it terrible what's happening in Ukraine with all these bombings every day and many, many other crimes?" And she said, "Yes, But we suffered also when NATO bombed us. She simply didn't, she's a nice person, but she simply didn't understand what had happened and what is happening now. And that is because Serbia is under a full-fledged attack of Russian propaganda every day. And people are really have a disturbed mindset, in my view. Really. Someone said this to me, I talked to me. But in any case, so I will put this forward and say, if we do not take human rights and this human dignity as the basis of all our thinking and speaking every day, then things may go very wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Как се почтува?
I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. You made great points in different, for different topics, and you've mentioned Serbia, you've mentioned intellectuals, and I am really eager to know how it is possible that this propaganda against intellectuals, which is promoted via authoritarian regimes, is spreading so intensively. Even on the ideological level, they have invented this term as anti-scientism, which means this is a part of their agit-prop agenda. They hate intellectuals. They go against intellectuals. They scrutinize them, they satanize them. And this is the question when in all authoritarian circumstances is addressed and ideologically supported.
But they have their own intellectuals, don't forget.
Yes, of course.
There are quite a few intellectuals which actually are in favor of authoritarianism. Even in Germany, I could give you the names of some, I don't want to do it here. But I'm sometimes frightened, people who are professors, who are have a long career. Now she knows better what is going on in Germany. And I'm shocked. I'm shocked that really and well-known intellectuals.
We have same here.
They
So
just
we're
signed a
familiar with that.
new letter, 32 of these intellectuals for that practically Ukraine should compromise and give up.
Also interesting is how authoritarian alliances are making their bonding. How do they share their know-how? What are they doing? I mean, I have an impression that our progressive families, human rights defenders, are in a way weaker than their ways of bonding. What do you think on this, dear Katarina?
Yeah, I'll start with I'm representing a German NGO here, but on my badge it says Ukraine, and I always, wherever, in whichever function I am, I represent Ukraine too. And what it means to me is this feeling of never doing enough. And I'm not on the front now, and it's a decision for today. And I'm sorry about not being there, not defending democracy and freedom with my body. But how I help myself with it? By wearing military shoes. I choose military shoes to go on this stage because it somehow helps me to reconnect with what it is actually about and to be grateful to the people who could also sit here in a nice warm room. But they decided to go on the front and to fight for democracy with their bodies, and maybe also to die for that. And we definitely need to remember about that yes, we are not doing enough, and we have to do more. What it's also about for me, it is going from one country to another to try to somehow reconnect and connect the democratic forces, what you were saying. And I see it as a problem number one, yes, that that the dictators are really good at bonding and are really good at networking. And the Democrats are thinking 10 times before they network with someone. Are you good enough for me? Are you professional enough? Is it comfortable enough for me to cooperate with you? So we need to face this problem first of all. We are really bad at networking and keeping the connections. And I will name 3 problems, and I will also try to give some solutions to them. The second problem is that disinformation and propaganda target people on the level of information, emotion, and values. And what we were also asked to talk about here was media literacy. And I think that media literacy is only about information. And this is where we are weak. Our weapon is not good enough. We are like, okay, we see that disinformation is working with people on 3 levels, and we counter it with just one direction. No, we have to go deeper. We have to go to search for something more. And then, wait, I wrote it down, what I wanted to say.
What are your findings and analysis on how disinformation and propaganda deriving from Kremlin affects democracy and human rights? Maybe you can tell us more on Ukraine. How is it
gladly, yeah.
coping after more than 1,000 days of full-scale invasion? Maybe.
It's more than 10 years, yeah? So it's definitely more than 1,000 days of war. It's more than 10 years. And like the third problem that I would like to tackle is that the main effect of disinformation is that it's not that the fake news is spread. It's not that people believe in false information. It's that people don't believe in anything. People tend to think, okay, we live in the post-truth society, so there is no need to search for the truth. I just give it up. But still, in the end, they believe someone. So it's like the facts don't matter anymore. If Trump says migrants are eating cats and dogs, sure, people somehow know this is not true, but they decide to trust him. They decide to go with him. And this is like what we are really losing. We are losing this trust from the people. People don't want to search for truth. That's why also media literacy is not an answer. Because we can have people who are really good at defining what is fake news and what is not, but they would still go for authoritarian regimes. So what I suggest, for the thing about like not only working on the level of information, but also to work on with the emotions and values, we need to leave the rooms like that. We need to go on the streets. We need to go to the cafes and bars and to face the people and to speak to them. This is extremely emotional and time-consuming and very uncomfortable, but I don't see any other way than to do that. We, as CRISP, the German NGO, do it in Eastern Germany. So I let people who are brainwashed by Russia throw their narratives on me. And it's no pleasure, but I can then somehow bring them to some empathy. I can try to change their perspective. I can search for the emotion and for some value that connects us. Because they are in their echo chamber. It doesn't matter how good my reels are, how great my articles or books are. I also brought my book. We analyzed narratives that are most widely spread in Germany, like the anti-Ukrainian myths that are mostly widely spread in Germany. Nice tool, yes, if you want to prepare teachers to work to fight against disinformation. Good, but it's not for those who are not with us. If you want to mobilize people who are not with you, you need to go on the level of emotions and of the values with them. And there was a nice research done by Peter Pomerantsev on how to work with this connection. So he's saying you should not fight against disinformation. You should try to destroy the bond between the leader and the followers. So this is also something like, okay, if they are saying that it's all about security for them, and this is why they do not support Ukraine, be it in Germany or anywhere, then I go to this feeling and need for security, and I connect to that, and I say, I also want security. Believe me, I also want peace, and I want to keep this word for myself too, because what we have, meanwhile, that when you say peace, then you mean kind of like giving Ukraine up, or giving the democracies up. If you mean neutrality, this is also like, this is about cooperation with Russia. I just came from Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. These countries are saying they are neutral. And I get it that in the position that they are in, economically and geographically, it is a great courage to say that they are neutral. It actually means being anti-Russian. It actually means being pro-Ukrainian. And I see it as my task to value that, to say, okay, you are neutral, let's go with that. This is what works for you now. Let's build something up on that. So this is about the street dialogue and the dialogue on the everyday places. And we have a project with not such a bad financing, and unfortunately we don't find enough people who are not just fans of democracy, but are fans enough to go out of the seminar rooms, because we are too comfortable for that. And this is like my task somehow, and I hope that you will also join me on this, that mission to like mobilize people for democracy. Another one, this like post-truth society. I think what helps here is like non-formal education, the old methods, you know, the critical thinking, fostering. What we do here was developing educational materials together with the teachers from Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine. We based the method on dilemma-based learning. So we say if we have students in the classroom who are already reproducing this information, then we need to bring them back to taking the decisions. Okay, so we put a very complicated moral question, and the moral questions are things like where everyone takes a decision right away. So we motivate them to take decisions there, and then to bring it more into, okay, so what about consuming news? How do you take decision there? You cannot always stay just like kind of balanced out and not be anywhere. You need to take some decisions, and you need to base them on morality. And then the third thing about this the alliances, so it's not just enough to be connected. It should be really like connection on the eye level. I think that it is somehow interesting that today we've been speaking, so it's the third panel for now, and I think we talked more about Germany than about North Macedonia. And this is connected to our like somehow imperialistic connection of the knowledge. Who are the experts? Who are bringing the expertise to the room? And I have to admit, Germany is really bad at countering disinformation. I think that North Macedonia is way better in it. That we see such a resilience here, that we should learn from this, and we should hear why is the North Macedonian society so resilient, and take this knowledge to Germany and destruct this like monopoly of expertise. And then also, what I see a lot in Central Asia. Countries there also don't learn from each other. They always need an American to come and teach them, or anyone else who is like seen as an expert by everyone, and then they would still criticize. Yes, but it doesn't work for us. You didn't localize your knowledge, but it doesn't lead to next time invite more local the experts, or also like invite experts from some unpopular countries, and just to see, okay, what out of there can we take. So this like demonopolizing the expertise and professionalization. What we see, autocracies invest huge amounts of money in this information. They are, but because they take the decisions as one person. One person decided to destruct social cohesion in the democratic countries is their priority number one, so they pull all of the resources together and invest it there. We don't have that. We take the decisions together. So we need to be better at countering. And here I see, for example, how new methods are being used by the autocracies and how they are being neglected by the democracies. TikTok, AI. We say, oh no, that's too tricky for me, I don't deal with that. But I think that AI is a great tool. It has the potential to help us fight disinformation. Why don't we yet have in every country chatbots on checking the Russian disinformation and offering the narratives to counter them? It's not such a complicated thing to create. But instead we see that the AI is being used for deepfakes, etc. Same about TikTok. The right-wing parties are like so present there, and we are saying, yeah, but it's not very ethical, and we don't want to go there, and probably it will die anyway soon as the other platforms. We're not fast enough, we're not professional enough, we are not networked enough.
Thank you. Impressive. Well, as soon as I'm familiar, at the level of the EU, there are even some tendencies, regulation on to regulate all this media. And how do you find whether this will be useful or will go in line with the problem that you already mentioned, the regulation of the media assets and platforms that are using for spreading propaganda, also data, using the data?
Well, we see that the X has decreased its regulations, yeah, but I also heard about one interesting effect of that so what we had before, we had Twitter more for the democratic debate. Then we had several parallel platforms for the people who are spreading conspiracy theories and so they took over the people from Twitter to their other platforms. And now, by not having those regulations on X anymore, people are coming back to X. So maybe it might also have some kind of a positive effect. At least we are in the same room again, or like in the same digital room. We have more access to them again. Just as like one hint of light there, maybe we should also use that, because like if we only go with analysis of what is happening to us, then yes, the world is not becoming easier and more welcoming to us, but we need to work with what we have.
Thank you, Katarina. Dr. Konstantinos, what is the effect of your aggressive neighbors, Russia and Belarus, including the everlasting open questions of Kaliningrad on democracy and respect of human rights in your country? What can we learn from the Lithuanian example? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Indeed, I have to apologize to the rest of the panel and the esteemed auditorium, because I'll have to leave in about 10 minutes, so the time is indeed pressing. Apologies for that. It is my pleasure and honor to be here. I am representing Vilnius University in Lithuania, and obviously for us Lithuanians, the Russia-Ukrainian war is a key issue, but it happens to be an extra personal issue for myself as well. My father, he is ethnically Lithuanian. My mother, she is ethnically Buryat, which the Buryats, they happen to be the largest ethno-linguistic minority in Siberia. And at the same time, the Buryats have been very much prominent in a negative way, in a negative fashion throughout the entire decade of this war. To give you a reminder, the war goes on for 10 years. And I've got an anecdote, a story to tell, and two conclusions, two recommendations that complement the previous esteemed speakers in this regard. Back in July 2014, I was in Russia. I was in Siberia. My mother was attending after the graves of her parents. I also came along with her. Previously, I spent quite a lot of time there, almost probably every single summer of my life, roughly. So that would not make it 6 years, but 3+ definitely. And I had friends there. My birthday is on the 16th of July, midsummer, right? So we had a party with my friends, and then the next morning, you know, just woke up, switched on the TV screens, etc., and saw the news about the Ukrainian military plane being shot down by the so-called rebels representing the so-called People's Republics, the Donetsk, to be particular in this regard. And my friends, being, well, my friends, they perfectly understood my political position on the issue, but our relationship was, you know, we're kind of pinching one another when it came to the understanding of what had been going on in Ukraine back then. And they were like, look, we shot your plane again, like that, right? And this appeared to be the case because throughout several months beforehand, the Russians had indeed shot a couple of planes, transport planes, including that with Ukrainian paratroopers on board. But only several hours later, the narrative in the federal media switched like this, because it turned to be clear that it was MH17. And my friends, those same people who just a couple of hours ago were laughing and making, you know, jokes about these being the Ukrainian servicemen, right? They were like, oh, look, right? These are the Ukrainians who actually shot the plane. And I was like, are you stupid? What is going on? I mean, how come that you are interacting with reality in this manner, right? Whatever the federal box is telling you, you're internalizing it. And you know, this is the key issue. The Russians are not stupid. They do understand that there is reality, right? But they choose to ignore it. This is how authoritarian countries work. If the Russian reality about the war, about their predicament, about the entire history of the country, about their history particularly since Putin's arrival to power in 1999, not 2099, with the bombing of the apartment buildings, which is not a conspiracy theory, you know, FSB and all, it's the most plausible version. Let's just start from this, right? If the Russians would suddenly internalize the entire story of their life, because we've got a generation of the Russians who knew Putin only, that's it, it's their father figure in many ways, then their reality would crumble. And this is their personal choice, right? A very problematic one. Now, complementing to the esteemed contributions just made, I've got two key recommendations. The first, it has to do with the fact I very much liked your point about Immanuel Kant. Obviously, he was born in Königsberg, right? We would call it Karaliaučius, the Russians would call it Kaliningrad, an occupied city in an occupied region. In effect, this is something that we have to be plain about. And the region is very dear to our hearts because we happen to be neighbors. Take a look at what the Russians have done with the legacy of Immanuel Kant. It's actually very much telling. There is a house, yeah, but other than that, it's really non-existent that much. Immanuel Kant is a representative of enlightenment. And the key principle of enlightenment is reason, is this belief that reason trumps all of the other considerations. The reality that we're living currently in is quite different. Our philosophical tradition these days, the Rhinic one, is about deconstruction. It's postmodern, right? In many ways, it is about questioning everything. It is about questioning the objective truth, right? This brings quite a lot of problems. You know, the Trump effect, the Brexit in general, you know, it creates the environments for propaganda to truly thrive. And this is a big challenge that we've got. So one of my key recommendations is to make clear whenever we're interacting with the editorial that there is this thing called objective truth. Let us start from like the fundamentals. There is this thing which is called objective truth. So this should be the underlying principle. What the Russians have done with MH17, and you are well aware of methodology, they threw in a huge amount of various versions. And those versions, they're needed in order to mix up the reality. You know, then the people would say, look, but, you know, maybe all of the people on board, they were killed. beforehand, right? Maybe these were the Ukrainians, maybe these were the Americans, maybe the entire thing was stage managed. This is what the propaganda did throughout the first days of the actual MH17 related crisis. This is being done in order to confuse, right? You're well aware of this methodology. And then the Russians come up with, look, us shooting the plane is merely one of the versions. It's not one of the versions, it's the fact, right? It's the fact. So this is the first point about the objective reality. And the second point is about how to speak about the objective reality. It is about the vocabularies that we're using. What the authoritarian countries have done in the informational domain in particular, and what they are continuing to do, they're taking the concepts that we deem to be objective, that are describing social, political, and other phenomena. They're twisting those and then provide those back to the informational domain, to the informational market, if you will, right? It's really fascinating. I'm also happen to be a China specialist. How would you call the leader of China? You would say President Xi Jinping. And you would be right to a certain degree. His power lies not within this particular position. His power lies within the position of being the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. This is what we have to talk about, right? We are neighbors to Belarus. You would say President Lukashenko. President Lukashenko is not the president. The president of Belarus is located in my hometown, in Vilnius, and that's Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. The president of Russia is not Vladimir Putin. We don't know who that is, because what he did during the latest elections was, in effect, an usurpation of power, even according to the Russian constitution. Let us be plain about that. So this is only one of the examples how we are actually playing their own game. And there are so many other examples. You know, what they're very good at, you know, the term Orwellian, at twisting the language, right? And let us not follow their leash. Let us release ourselves from that leash, and let us be very strict about the definitions that we're using. The Russian Federation is not a federation, first of all, right? It's only merely a name, right? It does not operate as a federal structure. Believe me, I know. Right, I spent 3 years in Buryatia. It's not a federation, and this is only one of the beginnings, right? How we would disentangle this entire problem. So thanks a lot, and apologies for the rest of the term that I have to run away. But indeed, great panel.
Thank you so much. I'm sad that you have to leave because I had many questions. However, have a nice time. Our next speaker is Sergeant Switch. What are your perspectives on democracy and human rights in Serbia? We are really interested to know that. How Serbia's authoritarian regimes affect the overall stability and security of the country, but also the region, particularly in reference to Kosovo-Serbia relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Well, I would like, yes, to start maybe by, and it is a direct answer to your question, by the way, by trying for us together to explain what are we talking about when we talk about the authoritarian countries. Because there is a certain tendency to, you know, put aside Russia, Belarus, like kind of obviously authoritarian countries, and treat countries such as my own or Hungary as something different, and they are not. And this is what I want to explain here. You know, in my country concretely, for almost 10 years, we do not have media freedom. Practically, not practically, but all television stations with a national frequency are controlled by the government and by the president himself. Only, you know, less than 10% of the share is held by independent television stations that are basically on cable only. And in Serbia, still majority of the people get their information, you know, through the public service, through the TVs with national frequency, and this is what shapes their minds about what we were talking about. The second thing is we refer to these regimes as competitive authoritarianisms. This is one of the terms used, but they're not competitive. Serbia is not competitive since December last year. In December last year, the ruling party bussed tens of thousands of people from Bosnia and Herzegovina to vote in Belgrade elections and in other elections. And I took this publication because I think you had this in 2014 in this country. So it's just, I think, yes, been there, done that. I think that maybe you would beg to differ, but I think in my country it was done on steroids in comparison to 2014 here, but I might be wrong on that one. Lastly, since August, this year, but if not before, we do not have, or at least the freedom of assembly is threatened in a serious manner. And I think these things then come together because how we look at these particular type of regimes that we sometimes call competitive authoritarianisms, hybrid regimes, they're not separate types of regimes. They're just in a process that is going towards complete authoritarianism, and you can stop it with a snap. Now on you know, media literacy, the ambassador mentioned something that about Serbia. I think that's an interesting case. Actually, it is not Russia to blame for the way in which Serbian people think about the world, their own country, relations with other countries in the region. Their minds are shaped by the media machine of the ruling party in Serbia. So I think, and why am I underlying this? You may call the ruling party in Serbia useful idiots. We talked about it before. But I think it's deeper than that. This distinction needs to be made because our president was just received by the German chancellor as a legitimate partner in Germany because, yes, we do have lithium that everybody wants, and then our competitive authoritarianism is considered, well, you know, kind of they're acceptable. So I think this is a big problem that we have right now. And maybe I want to mention a research that is really interesting that actually, you know, explains this, what I'm saying, that it is the Serbian machine, media machine, that actually shapes hearts and minds of the people when they think about the war in Ukraine, because this is what we discussed. Basically in 2022, Open Society Foundations and UK-based organization Data Praxis, they did a big global public opinion survey in numerous countries of the world. I think that there were more than 20 countries, and Serbia was amongst them. They didn't publish the data on the war in Ukraine and Serbia in particular in their own publication, but we were given, my think tank, access to the raw data of this research, so we published in cooperation with them a separate type of research, separate publication called Beyond Sputnik and RT. And this explains this, that Serbia is a global outlier in pro-Russian narratives. And so, for example, responding to the question, who do citizens think is responsible for the beginning of the war in Ukraine? And the options offered were Ukraine, Russia, the West, and I don't know. Well, 63% of Serbs think it's the West. Not many, Well, here as well, same, and I think probably because you are enormous consumers of TV Happy, TV Pink from Serbia, and you know, probably there are other reasons, but I think this is a very important reason why this is so in Macedonia as well. So this is one thing, and there are other countries of the global south that come close to this, like Senegal 52, Indonesia 50, but no one was as much as Serbia. But now, interestingly, an answer to another question, which is, should Ukraine, how does the war, I'm paraphrasing, but how does the war in Ukraine end? And there were several statements offered. One of them was Ukraine should give part of its territory that Russia currently controls, so, you know, to have a ceasefire and peace talks and so on. The other one was that Russia should withdraw from all territories that it occupied. And interestingly, on average, when you look at the global south, that on the first question was weaker than Serbia, but, you know, kind of there. 57% of the global south do not agree with the statement that Russia should leave all the territories of Ukraine. In Serbia, not. Only 12% agree. So why is this? Like, you cannot say that there is more Russian propaganda in Serbia than in Moldova, for example, because Moldova in this research was not agreeing their citizens with this statement by and far. And interestingly, we also, well, at least a majority of the Serbs think that parts of our territory were taken in the past as well. You know, so how this paradoxical result here that they think that, you know, it's okay to take Ukrainian territory but not theirs. And this is something that we have been talking, it's not about the truth. It's about emotions. And why Serbs are pro-Russian? It's not because they know anything about Russia or that they really like Russia. They like Russia not because of what it is, but because of what it is not. And it is not the West. And I think this is the point of departure. And this explains why the lady was, you know, that you mentioned, was talking like that. It's not here, it's here. And the question is, how do we get to here? How do we get to change that? You know, this is a big puzzle, but I don't know to what extent are you following the situation in Serbia. We have a huge mobilization of students currently, and I think, you know, they're managing. Yes, I think they're managing quite well to do that, actually, right now. You know, to address power in a way that politicians and maybe traditional civil society that we haven't been able to until now. So, you know, but I can stop there for now because I don't know if there is Erwin as well to speak. So.
Well, I was just wondering if you can, before Mr. Fuere enters the room via digital tunnel, whether you can explain to us a little bit more on references how Ukraine and the question of Ukraine and intervention within the Ukraine and intervention in NATO and the question of Kosovo on the emotional level is explained between regular people in Serbia. So yes. Because we often hear, you see what they did to Serbia, now you will see what will happen to Ukraine. Let me be vulgar, but yes. This is the question that
well,
we have to address.
I think they don't really, there is a TV channel that I mentioned, TV Happy, which is really the most egregious example of pro-Russian propaganda. They even air Pervi Canal like live, and then they have subtitles and stuff like that. So it's not viewed so much. So I have access to the shares from time to time with our media partners. We can see it, the share of certain programs. I think it's more not knowing about what's going on and not caring, probably, which, it's not only in Serbia, let's face it. I mean, it's across Europe, as the war goes on, people are like kind of, looking the other way. So there is that. I think being exposed to people from Ukraine, being able to go, changes your views enormously, I think. Obviously, it's not many people will go to Ukraine for obvious reasons, because I did, but most Serbs wouldn't, and you wouldn't blame them for that, right? Ukrainians didn't come to Serbia much when we had wars and stuff. So, but I think it's about being exposed to the reality. When I was in Ukraine last year, I wrote a reportage about it from a human point of view, and it did have an impact, I think, of the readers of the newspaper that, I wrote for. But in general, the problem is that our government is having this duplicitous game, On the one hand, they spread this pro-Russian, anti-Western propaganda. When, for example, the First Lady of Ukraine came to Serbia with Kuleba, the foreign minister, this visit went almost completely unnoticed in the media under the control of the government. Usually, when foreign dignitaries come to Serbia, and this is one of the things that our current president introduced, their flags from the airport to the city center of both countries. Well, guess which country didn't get its flag? It's Ukraine. So while the president is abroad, he brags about selling ammunition to Ukraine, which is good, There is a dark side of it because it fuels an enormous corruptive machine within the country, and whistleblowers from Serbia, investigative journalists, wrote about that. But obviously in geopolitical terms, like lithium is something that buys him favors in the West. So there is this side, but he doesn't talk too much about it in Serbian media. And why? And I would...
So you are saying he is a clever populist?
He's an authoritarian guy that is authoritarian as much as he can within the circumstances that he is in. We should not forget we're a candidate country for EU membership, so if nothing else, they see in Belgrade the regime, EU as a cash cow. They need the money from the EU, so I think there are limits to the authoritarianism, but increasingly less so. I think many red lines have been broken this year. Yeah, but maybe I could quote another research from 2021, December of BIEPAG, because you mentioned this other affiliation of mine. So we did a survey of the geopolitical views of the citizens of the Western Balkans countries. And in Serbia, it's interesting when you cross the political affiliation of the citizens and their geopolitical preferences, you see that by and large the ruling party voters are pro-Russian and pro-Chinese, so pro-authoritarian in that way. So why they do this as well, why they don't display Ukrainian flags and that, it's also because of internal political reasons. So they're kind of, it's, like this tail wagging the dog scenario where, they create a narrative that like bounds them in a certain, limits their actions. So I don't, yeah.
Thank you. So I have many more questions. Unfortunately, we don't have time for all of them. Now, is it possible to check on Mr. Fuere? Yes? Welcome, Mr. Fuere. How are you doing? Where are you?
Yes, I'm very good. I'm speaking to you from Connemara, the west of Ireland.
Wow.
One of the westernmost parts of Europe, I guess. I'm so sorry that I cannot be with you and to join in such a distinguished panel of speakers. But I will be very brief because so many of the comments that have already been made I can echo and support wholeheartedly. I sent the text of my presentation already some days ago to the organizers. But let me just say a few things following on from the previous speakers. First of all, there's no doubt that we have been far too complacent in the European Union on the protection of fundamental freedoms and for human rights and democracy. We have taken them far too long for granted. And we only started seeing a pushback very, very late in the day. Look at the European Parliament, for example. It took a long time before the European People's Party suspended the governing party of Viktor Orban, despite the fact that he was demonstrating very clear actions, tendencies, actions that undermined the basic principles of the rule of law, which are sacrosanct and are part of the commitments that all member states must adhere to. And of course, speaking of candidate countries, we know how the European People's Party also supported and protected former Prime Minister of North Macedonia, even when he was under investigation for corruption. So the European Parliament is at fault, as is, I'm afraid, the European Commission. The European Parliament, we've had elections earlier this year, and we've seen a growing rise of, again, those populist tendencies. We will see how this will impact on the various policies of the European Union. We've already seen a rather negative impact regarding the climate change and Green Deal. Let's hope that similar negative impacts don't happen with regard to the very critical policy agenda, policy of the European Union, which is the enlargement in the coming years, and making sure that the current negotiations are successful. The European Commission is, we forget sometimes, guardian of the treaties. It has a binding commitment to ensure that all member states fully respect the basic principles of democracy, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law. And yet, it took quite some time for the Commission to introduce some of the measures that are contained in the basic treaties of the European Union, to take measures against those countries, such as Hungary, to mention one, that were not respecting the basic principles of the rule of law. Because it took them so long to initiate those legal proceedings, of course, we saw Viktor Orban trying to do whatever he could to see how much he could do before the Commission would act. And this is a constant challenge. We saw how during his current mandate as President of the Council, which fortunately is ending at the end of this month, and then we will have a more reasonable, moderate presidency in the hands of Poland that will take the presidency of the Council. But we have seen how in these recent months, Viktor Orban has again tried to undermine, and basically it showed his dismissal of EU institutions. So now we have a new European Commission, and it is absolutely vital that they should catch up on ground lost and do everything possible to make sure that within the European Union there is a full respect, and that if some member states continue to disrespect the rule of law and the basic principles, that it must immediately launch the legal proceedings, because it does have all the instruments at its disposal not just the Article 7 suspension of voting rights, but also the conditionality attached to financial assistance from the European Union. As we know, in the recent past, there were several large sums of money that were kept back from Hungary because of the fact that they were not respecting the rule of law. So that needs to be used much more effectively and to ensure that the principles are not undermined by these authoritarian tendencies. And of course, it is also the Commission's role to make sure that similar actions are taken with regard to candidate countries. And we, of course, you see there are the annual country reports for each of the candidate countries. I have to say, as Sergeant was mentioning Serbia, that I find it quite extraordinary that several EU leaders have been traveling to Belgrade, including the President of the Commission, and praising Mr. President Vučić for progress in the rule of law, when at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, and Sergeant, please correct me, the government is detaining more and more representatives of civil society purely because they are criticizing the government or campaigning against this lithium agreement that was signed some time ago. So this is not conducive to making sure that those candidate countries like Serbia will fully respect the principles that they should be respecting as candidate countries. And I think it behoves on the European Commission to make sure that it is not complacent or does not try to gloss over many of the issues concerning the violation of the rule of law happening in countries such as Serbia. And I would also emphasize two other aspects. One is the role of civil society. And we have seen that this is a requirement for all candidate countries because we all know that civil society is a critical element in ensuring accountability of the governments. Of course, if they are put in jail, as is happening in a number of instances in Serbia, it doesn't help. And this should be called out by the European Commission and not accepted as unfortunately it seems to be happening. I'm delighted to see that the new Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Koss, last week at an event I attended in Brussels, she was very clear, and she says that I will do everything possible to ensure that the governments fully respect the critical role of civil society. She also said she will go out to meet with human rights defenders, and this was really a breath of fresh air compared to the dreadful record of her predecessor, who did very little in this respect. So I'm hopeful that the new commission with the new Commission for Enlargement will really turn the page and ensure that there's a far greater attention on all of these aspects with regard to the accession process. And lastly, with regard to independent media, and there we have seen, it was mentioned by Sergeant and others, but also in North Macedonia, we have seen instances of where journalists have been attacked, criticized on social media merely because they presented objective views with regard to current events. And many of them have been subject to lawsuits as well as a way of silencing journalists. And here again, we are fortunate that finally the European Union now has, following the adoption of a directive, now has an instrument which will ensure that try to reduce these lawsuits. It's called the so-called SLAP Directive on Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation. Of course, legislation is fine, but it's not enough. And what we need to do is to ensure that the mindsets are also changed so that governments accept that it is the role of journalists to be critical of governments and, like civil society, to hold them accountable. So I will conclude there by hoping and relatively optimistic after my discussions last week in Brussels and hearing statements like the one from the new commissioner. I'm hopeful that there will be a change of approach and that there'll be a far more rigorous attention to ensuring that both inside the European Union and with regard to candidate countries, full respect of the principles that are at the foundation of the European project, which we mustn't forget is a peace project. Thank you, and I'm happy to be with you and to answer any questions.
Therefore, before I give the floor to our panelists, I have one question, please, for you, which...
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, because I don't see you, sorry.
Sorry, you don't...
But I can hear you very well. If I may ask you to put a word on North Macedonia, please, having in mind your decades of experience here, and how do you assess the new arrivals here, and in terms of course, in terms of democracy and human rights? Thank you.
Yes, well, there's lots I could say on North Macedonia, but obviously time. And yes, it is clear that the North Macedonia is facing some difficult challenges with regard to its accession process, not least the issue of the ongoing bilateral dispute with Bulgaria. I asked a question on that to the commissioner last week, and she was very clear. She said that it is the desire and her wish that bilateral disputes do not impede the accession process, and she admitted that the Commission has not been as successful as it would wish in preventing bilateral disputes from undermining the accession process and also undermining the credibility of the European Union. Imposed solutions are not ones which will guarantee long-term reconciliation. Be that as it may, an agreement was presented, and so I think it will be important for the government to continue on this path to try to resolve this problem. But it is quite clear that bilateral disputes must be dealt with separately from the accession process. If they are allowed to impede on the accession process, if we allow history and identity and other such issues to enter into the accession process, then the accession process of the European Union will be a failure. And it's absolutely vital that the European Commission sets up a separate mechanism to deal with these bilateral disputes and to find common solutions that will not impede but promote reconciliation in the region. And that's another point that the Commissioner said, which was that part of her initial statement is to promote reconciliation. Again, admitting that not enough had been done in this respect, and this will now be also one of the important priorities for the European Commission in the region. And with regard to the media, as I mentioned, there have been, and the Commission's report mentions that, the recent progress report on North Macedonia mentions the various number of attacks and that have been perpetrated verbally, but also, I understand, physically, against journalists, and the way social media is being used by government supporters to undermine the credibility of journalists who are just fulfilling their professional duties. And there again, it is important that the government do everything possible to prevent this happening. Accepting criticism should be a normal part of a democracy. And like in Serbia, unfortunately, we see that the governing parties don't seem to want to accept that. So yes, there's still a lot of work to be done for the North Macedonia in the accession process. The rule of law, corruption is still a terrible problem, as we've seen the latest United States declaration on the blacklist people. And this shows that the government needs to do much, much more on these issues in order to continue on its journey towards the European Union.
Thank you so much. Since we are entering the the last phase of our panel, I will give you one more round of comments. Also, if someone wants to comment from the broader public, please welcome, so we can finish in 15 minutes max. Thank you.
Several times ending the Russian war against Ukraine, and I think that this debate about ending this war is led under large misunderstanding of what Russian occupation is about. Russian occupation means torture, execution, deportation of kids. We don't see it enough. Russia started this war out of imperialistic reasons, and it will only voluntarily end this war if it reached its imperialistic ideas and tasks. Otherwise, it will just be a break for preparing another wave of escalation. So ending this war is about your own security. Because if you and the whole world today does not fight for democracy, you might one day have to fight for autocracy. Because it will be invaded, and it will then you would have to invade other nations. This is like, okay, we have the North Korean soldiers in Russia now. They are not in Ukraine yet. But did they go there voluntarily, or were they sent there? This kind of is not connected to Russia, but it is still connected to that. And I think we really misunderstand this. Like, everybody's tired of Ukraine. Everybody's like, okay, but let's better talk about us now. It is about you. It is about everybody of us. And yeah, we need to have this better understanding. And also in terms of sanctions, yeah, like Russia trying to omit sanctions through Serbia, through Kazakhstan, and these countries tend to think or pretend it's not about security. It is very much about security. Also, disinformation is about the security, and you cannot fight against disinformation if you do not involve civil society, because it is so much in the society. So you need to mobilize everyone, and That's just what I wanted to say, because it's now very much, especially since Trump was re-elected, he is supposed to end this war with just one call. I don't believe in that, because any methods that were suggested were not about somehow ending the imperialistic ideas that Russia has. It was a kind of playing with them, and I don't see any end to that. Also, Russia has clearly said there are no limits to the Russian world. everywhere where there is where there are Russians or where the Russian language sounds. This is all Russia. So it's they do not they never showed any willingness to stop when they invaded full the Ukraine. It will go further.
Yes, as I did not say very much about the region in my short statement, I wanted to refer to what Mr. Andriauskas said, first of all, and Mr. Svijic as well. Mr. Andriauskas said something, I think, which is also very fundamental, perhaps, what I tried to say with the human dignity, and that is that there is an objective truth, so that we have to fight this perception that everything is relative and that everybody is using propaganda on all sides. And that is something which is systematically done by certain media and certain regimes, and for good reason, because that is their aim, to confuse the people, that they do not believe anything anymore. No? And I very often get that reaction, particularly when I talk to citizens from the region here with whom I meet in Vienna, where I live. And therefore, that is something very crucial to counter it, because many of you are journalists or civil society activists, and what he said, go on the street, or what you said, go on the street, go into meetings and say there is an objective truth. And we have to fight for that truth and fight against disinformation, because it is really completely destroying the mindset of people. And what democracy needs is people who are clear about what is right and what is wrong. And then I come back to my thesis of the dignity of the human being. If this is not in our mind, that every human being in principle has this fundamental dignity and that we have to protect it, the society, the state, which is not the case right now, even not in Western countries. You mentioned Hungary was several times mentioned, but there are others, Slovakia right now, and I do not want to blame others, but we have the problem within the EU, not only in the countries here in the region, but they are weaker due to many reasons. Also due to, in my view, very disturbed EU accession process, for which the EU is responsible, for EU countries, including Germany, is responsible. And I very much hope that Mr. Fourier is right, that the new Commission will mean a new approach.
Remarks,
what?
Yes. He puts promising remarks.
Yes. We'll get to a new approach, but after so many years also in this business, I must say I'm still somewhat skeptical. I hope that it will be better. And Mr. Svijic perhaps can say something.
On this note, Ambassador, I think we are beyond skepticism. Nobody in Serbia, nobody democratically minded in Serbia counts on the EU, or very few people. We count only on our own forces to combat the regime. And even in such a situation, it has become a liability to count on the EU, unfortunately. But Erwin mentioned, and this is maybe an answer why it has become a liability to an extent. He mentioned, no, you're absolutely right when he says about the detentions. And I think what Professor also said is interesting. It's true. We should name the things by their own name, by their true name. And what we are facing in Serbia is illegal detentions of people. Basically, when the environmental protests started, the prosecution and police, they abuse the Serbian penal code. They accuse people who are Facebook group administrators or things like that on charges of sedition and trying to overthrow the constitutional order, which are very serious crimes that they obviously did not commit. And then through plea bargain agreements that we have in Serbia, we have it introduced in our legal system in the 2000s, Basically, they make them confess a lesser crime that they equally did not commit, which is violence at public events and sports gatherings. So they have to admit that they committed a crime that they didn't. In the meantime, they keep many of them in detention. So this is a red line that has been crossed. And whatever the commissioner says, unfortunately doesn't change this. Maybe it will in the future. We hope we will. When our elections were stolen last year, we hope so much that the EU will help. I was even waving a EU flag in front of 30,000 people in Belgrade, making a fool out of myself, and what we had, nothing, absolutely nothing. We had the memorandum on lithium signed, and you know, so
Blah, blah, blah.
yes, yes.
Did approach, okay. Dear guests, maybe you have some questions to our panelists? Or we can close the panel. Thank you for your attention. But he didn't mention that he wants to. Maybe Mr. Fourier, if he's still with us. I feel like really strange. Okay, obviously he's not with us anymore.
Yes, I'm still here.
Ah, here you are. But why you are hiding yourself?
No, it's the technology.
Thank you. Maybe you want to add something, and then we are closing the.
No, just to say that I think we have to be optimistic. There's no doubt about it. And I'm hopeful that we will see a qualitative change in how things are done now from the EU side with regard to the Western Balkans. So that's my final word as we approach the end of the year and we start another one with trepidation, but with hope.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all of you for your attention, for our great panelists, for civil media, and have a nice day. This panel is closed.